We're at Gufa on DAF Kuf Dalet Amud Aleph. It's about 15 lines down from the top. Gufa, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Oshia. Hapoches lo yivchos mishalosh, v'hamosif lo yosif al sheva. That when it comes to the Havdalah blessing, you're supposed to say several phrases of God dividing between one thing and another thing. The minimum phrases you should use are 3, and the maximum you should use are 7. We saw that yesterday, right? So Meisvei, so the Gemara challenges that, and it says, Omer Havdalos b'motzoi Shabbosos u'v'motzoi Yomim Tovim u'v'motzoi Yom HaKippurim u'v'motzoi Shabbos liyom Tov u'v'motzoi Yom Tov l'cholo shel Moed. These are the following times you make Havdalah. When on a regular Motzei Shabbos you make Havdalah, on a regular Motzei Yom Tov you make Havdalah, on a regular Motzei Yom Kippur you make Havdalah. When Shabbos leads into Yom Tov, when Yom Tov is on a Sunday, a Saturday night, so then you make Havdalah between Shabbos and Yom Tov. And when Yom Tov leads into Chol HaMoed, you make Havdalah then also. The only time you don't make Havdalah, avolo b'motzei Yom Tov l'Shabbos. Like we had this year, when Simchas Torah led into Shabbos, we did, and we made 3 times, right? But we didn't make Havdalah in our Kiddush from Friday to Shabbos. The reason is, as the Rashbam explains, based on a metaphor, he says, when the second in command to the king is leaving and the king is waiting to enter, you don't spend time escorting out the second in command and keeping the king waiting. So you go immediately to the king and you let the second in command, the Afarchos, escort himself out. Now, I think that that's just a metaphor, but really the explanation is that anytime you're upgrading in Kedusha, there's no reason to make Havdalah. The only time you'd make Havdalah is to demarcate that we're downgrading in Kedusha. So anyway, Harogil Omer Harbe, V'shein Harogil Omer Echas. That someone who was well versed in the phrases of Havdalah should say multiple phrases, and a person who's not well versed only says one phrase. So you see that it's less than 3. You see that there's only one phrase in Havdalah for some people. So the Gemara answers Tanoi. You're right. It's a machlokas Tanoi. That Omer Rabbi Yochanan Binan shel Kedoshim Omer Echas V'nahogu Ha'am Lomar Shalosh. That there's a Tana who's identified by the nickname of the son of holy ones. He says you only say one phrase. However, the nation, which is a reference, according to the Rashbam, to the colleagues of this other Tana, the other Tanoim of his time, they all say 3 phrases. Manihu Binan Shel Kedoshim, who is this Tana identified as the son of holy ones? Rabbi Menachem Bar Simoy. That's his name. V'amai korulei benan shel kedoshim d'lo istakel b'tzorta dezuza. Why did they identify him as such with that nickname? The answer is because he was a person who really sanctified himself beyond the letter of the law. He never would look at the image that was minted on a coin, on the face of a coin, because in those days they were Roman gods and Roman icons that were on the faces of coins. They were associated with idolatry, and he didn't want to look at those things at all. So he would, I don't know, the question is, how did he pay for anything? How did he know the difference between a quarter and a dollar, a loonie and a toonie? I guess you'd have to say that he probably felt it or whatever when he used the coins, but he wouldn't look at the face of the coin. Sholach le Rav Shmuel Bar Idi, Chananya Achi Omer Echas, that Rav Shmuel Bar Idi sent a message saying that my brother only says one phrase when he makes Havdalah, V'les Hilchas HaKavase, but the Gemara says that's not the halacha. We have to say at least 3. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Hamavdol Tzarech Sheyomer Me'ein Havdalos Ha'amuros B'Torah. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi goes even further. The phrases that you use in the Havdalah that talk about God dividing between things have to hearken back to psukim that are contained in Tanakh. Meaning that you just can't make up some kind of idea that God divides between black and white. It's got to be something written in Tanakh that you're referring to in these phrases. So the Gemara now challenges that with the following brisa. And you're going to see that this brisa uses 7 phrases and not 3. Seder Havdalos Heich. What are the phrases you're supposed to use? Now count the phrases that we're going to say. Number 1, Hamavdul ben Kodesh l'chol, that's 1. Bein or l'choshech, between light and darkness, is 2. Bein Yisrael la'amim, between Israel and the nations, is 3. Bein Yom Hashvi'i l'sheishes yemei hamasa, is 4. Bein tamei letohar, between impure and pure, is 5. Bein hayam lecharava, between the ocean and dry land, is 6. Bein mayim elyonim l'mayim atachtonim is 7. And bein kohanim l'levim v'yisraelim is 8. So we've got 8 phrases here. Now hold on, we're going to have to analyze this. The choseim b'seder bereshis, and you finish off the Havdalah by saying Baruch Atah Hashem, so there bereshis. That's actually the opinion of this brisa, that's how you end off Havdalah. Because when you think about it, the whole act of creation of bereshis is all about God dividing. And that's actually sort of the Neoplatonic model of what creation is that emanations emanating from God and dividing further and further from the unitary entity of the Almighty. Ve'acherim omrim biyotzer bereshis. Others say that the correct language is yotzer bereshis, that God forms creation. But in Rabbi Yossi b'Rebbi Yehuda Omer Choseim Mekadesh Yisrael, he says that the proper conclusion of the bracha is Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael, that you sanctify Israel, because the sanctification of Israel is also a division, that God divides between Israel and the other nations. So now that's the conclusion of the brisa. Now, if we look carefully at all of these phrases, we're going to see phrases that harken back to Psukim in Tanakh, with one exception. The only one that does not harken back to a pasuk is that in all of these other things you have the verb of lahavdil, to divide. So let's go through. Hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol, that God separates between holiness and purity. That's a pasuk in the Torah. Lahavdil ben hakodesh uvein hachol. It also says uvein hatamei uvein hatohor. I think it's a pasuk at the end of Shmini, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, and then it says, when it talks about or and choshech, it says vayavdel elokim bein haor uvein hachoshech. When you talk about the upper waters and the lower waters, it says vayavdel Elokim bein hamayim asher me'al lo rakia, bein hamayim asher mitachas lo rakia, bein hamayim asher me'al lo rakia. Right? God separated between the upper waters and the lower waters. And it's when it talks about bein Yisrael ha'amim, God says va'avdil eschem min ha'amim. I've separated you from the other nations. The only one, there are actually 2 that are not written, but the one that the Gemara picks up on, is that even though it's true that God actually gathered the water together in order for dry land to emerge, the verb vayavdel is not used in that context. It just says vayomer Elokim yikavu hamayim mitachas hashamayim el makom echad v'seira'eh hayabasha. That God said, let all of the lower waters gather together in one place so that dry land may be visible. It doesn't say that God separated between the 2, and therefore the question is, how can you use that phrase? Answers the Gemara, Sami mikan ben hayom lecharava. So you're right, says the Gemara, you have to erase that phrase from the brisa. That's not one of the 7. Ihachi ben yom hashvi l'sheishis me'amasa nomi. So the Gemara says, but you also don't see a pasuk in the Torah that talks about God separating or dividing between the 6 days of creation and the 7th day of Shabbos. There's no verb of vayavdel over there. So the Gemara says, you're right, but me'ein chasimahu. But that's not one of the 7 phrases, because that's just a preface to the final phrase of God, of making Havdalah. Like we saw yesterday, that you're supposed to end with a prefatory phrase that sort of previews the chasima, the ending bracha. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, then botzar chada v'leka sheva. Then you're only left with 6 phrases, because we started off with 8. We took out the phrase of bein hayom lecharava. Now we're down to 7. But if yom hashvi l'sheishis me'amasa is not one of the 7 phrases, we only have 6.
What about the Mavdil ben Yom Laila? It's not a pasuk that we say in Mariv?
There is such a pasuk. The question is, why is that pasuk not appear in the Havdalah? It's a good question. I don't. Perhaps that's the same thing as Or and Choshech. Perhaps one could argue that that's the same thing, and that's why it's subsumed under Or and Choshech. So the Gemara answers, Amri Kohanim Leviim v'Yisraelim Tremilu Ninu. Answers the Gemara that when it says that God divided between Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, well, this actually counts as 2, because it's 2 divisions instead of 1. You're breaking it up into 3 parts, so that's 2 divisions. Bein Leviim leYisraelim, so there's the division between Levis and Yisraels. D'chsiv ba'esahi hibdil Hashem eshevet halevi. That at that time God separated the Levite tribe from the rest of Israel. And Ben HaKohanim LaLevim Dichsiv, B'nei Amram, Aaron uMoshe, Vayibodei LaHaron LaHakdisho Kodesh Kadoshim. That it says in the pasuk, that we have to wait till Divrei Hayomim to actually see this pasuk. It's not in the Chumash, but it's in Divrei Hayomim that the sons of Amram, Aaron and Moshe, and then it says that Aaron was divided and separated from the rest of the Levium to be holy of holies. So you see that there too the verb of Vayibodel or Vayavdel is used. So now the Gemara says, Michta Mai Chasim. Okay, now no matter how you learn, whether it's 3 phrases or 7 phrases, what is the correct concluding bracha of Baruch Atah Hashem? Now we say Hamavdul ben Kodesh L'chol, but that's not clear to the Gemara. Rav Amar Mekadesh Yisrael. Rav says the proper bracha is he who sanctifies Israel. Now the question is, what does that have to do with Havdalah? So as I mentioned, just like you see that there's a division between the holy and the mundane when it comes to chronology, you also see that there's a division between the holy and the mundane when we talk about the Jewish nation separated from the other nations of the world. Mm-hmm. And since we, as the Jewish nation, are the only ones who observe Shabbos, which is the separation, so it fits in with thematically with the idea of God dividing and making Havdalah. Ushmuel Amar Hamavdul ben Kodesh L'chol. And Shmuel says, no, the more correct or apt ending is Hamavdul ben Kodesh L'chol. Layit Allah Abaya Vitema Rav Yosef, Aha de Rav. And Abai and some say Rav Yosef were critical of Rav Shita, and they felt that Mekadesh Yisrael is not an apt ending. It's too generic or it's too loosely connected, and therefore it's more appropriate to say Hamavdul ben Kodesh L'chol. Tana Mishmei de Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya Kol HaChoyse Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hamavdul ben Kodesh L'chol Marich Lo Yamav U'Shnosaf. He says it's best to say both, that if a person says both Mekadesh Yisrael and V'Hamavdul ben Kodesh L'chol, then you'll have a long life. That was sort of like a guarantee to say, look, put the two together. You're grouping together both the division between Israel and the nations and the Sabbath and the mundane times. So that's thematically connected, and therefore you're covering all your bases. However, v'lesil chesakavase, but we don't paskin that way. Now, why don't we paskin that way? So Tosfos and the Rashbam both explain, because you're only allowed to, in a chasim of a bracha, you're only allowed to be chaysim with one theme. Mm-hmm. You can't use multiple themes with one under the rubric of one bracha. So here, apparently, the way that the poskim come out is that even though thematically they're related, that they both deal with division, but one is division of nations, one's the division of time, and therefore it's too much of a stretch to combine them together under one bracha. By the way, we often say Mekadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael b'Hazmanim, so there, thematically, they're much more connected. They're all having to do with time. Why do we put in Mekadesh Yisrael? So the Gemara explains, because you need Yisrael to declare the Rosh Chodesh in order for you to know when Yom Tov falls out. So thematically, they're all connected, but you don't need Yisrael in order to have a Shabbos. Shabbos is automatic, and that's why they're not correctly connected.
It seems logical, but where did the Chachamim get to the idea that you can only do it that way with one,
well, they're the ones who made the rules, and so they basically said that I don't know exactly how to express what their thinking was, but they basically said, we want you to stay focused on one theme when you make a bracha. Ula ikla Pumpadisa. Ula once was visiting the city of Pumpadisa. This was a big treat for the people of that region. So Amarle Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchak Berei Zil Amtale Kalkola de Peri V'Chazi Heichi Avdil. Rav Yehuda wanted to learn from Ula how he made Havdalah. So he sent his son Rav Yitzchak on a mission. He said, bring him a fruit basket. That'll be your pretense to go and visit. And while you're there, you'll watch him to make Havdalah. We do the same thing. Send him a fruit basket. But this way, no, bring the fruit basket yourself. And therefore, you'll be able to meet the great Rabbi, and you'll be able to see how he makes Havdalah. So, Lo Azal, Shagar Le Abaye. So Rav Yitzchak said, you know what, I don't have time for this. So he sent his friend Abaya instead to go. So, Ki Asa Abaya Amar Le, Hechi Amar. So when Abaya comes back, Rav Yitzchak says, so how taka did Ula make Havdalah? Amar lei, Baruch HaMavdul ben Kodesh L'chol, Amar V'sulo. He said, Baruch HaMavdul ben Kodesh L'chol, and that was it. Now it's unclear from the Gemara what this actually means. We're going to see it's a machlokes between the Rashbam and Tosfos. According to the Rashbam, he didn't use any phrases at all. But he just said a one-line bracha like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi from yesterday's DAF. When it came time for Havdalah, he just said, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, hamavdul ben kodesh l'chol. That's it. No 3 phrases, no 7 phrases.
No
That's it. Right? It was a no frills Havdalah. Exactly. So, Asa Lakami De'avua, Amar Le Hechi Amar. So he comes, so Rav Yitzchak then goes to his father to report back what Abaya had seen. So his father says, Rav Yehuda says to him, Sotaka, what did Ula say? So Amar Le, Ana lo azla, Ana shardarte le Abaya, Amar Le, Hamavdul ben Kodesh l'chol. So Rav Yitzchak confessed to his father, says, Father, look, I didn't go myself. I couldn't go myself, but I sent my friend Abaya, and he reported back that the correct position is, just to say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Hamavdul ben Kodesh l'chol. So Amar Le, Rav Rivanu se demar, V'sararu se demar, Garma le lamar delotema shmaite mipume. He says it was your Rav Rivanuse, your leadership or your rabbinic status. And Sararuse, which either comes from the word Sarara, which means leadership, or it could come from the word Sorer, Umoreh, which is waywardness. It was your waywardness, sort of perhaps your arrogance, which was what? Haughtiness, right? Which was the cause of you not being able to be quoted directly to say what Ula had said. And like the Rashbam explains, that if you had gone yourself, then we would always be citing you as the person who quotes Ula as what to do. But now that you didn't go yourself, we're going to be quoting Abaya instead, and we know that there's a principle that a person remains immortal when Torah is said in their name. Because as the Gemara says, Fosaim dovavos bekever, that any time you quote a great person who said words of Torah, their lips continue moving even in the grave. So that keeps them alive even after death. So you lost that opportunity because now we're not going to be quoting you, we're going to be quoting Abaya instead. Ironically,
correct, he gets quoted.
Ironically, we have another lesson that we can quote Rav Yitzchak, and the lesson is, make sure when your father sends you, you go to see the Rebbe directly. So now Rav Yitzchak's lips will be moving because of that lesson. Very good. Okay, so Meisvei. So now the Gemara says, let's challenge Ula's Shita. Ula's Shita was, you say, Baruch HaMavdul ben Kodesh l'chol. So Kol HaBrachos Kulan Poseach beBaruch v'chosein Bahem beBaruch, that the Brisa says, a general rule, this is in Maseches Brachos, all brachos have to open with the Baruch Atah Hashem and end with the final phrase of Baruch Atah Hashem, etc. However, there are exceptions. Chutz mi birkas mitzvos u'birkas aperos, except when you're making a one-line bracha on a mitzvah, a one-line bracha on food, let's say Borei Priya Eitz or Borei Priya Adama, u'bracha smucha lechaverta, and another exception is when you have a bracha that immediately comes after a previous bracha, like in Shmona Esrei. There the brachas don't open with the words Baruch Atah Hashem, because we rely on the ending, the chasima of the previous bracha, to act as our Baruch Atah Hashem for the following bracha. So anytime you have a bracha that's adjacent to the previous bracha, you don't open the new bracha with Baruch Atah Hashem. Okay, that's the general principle of bracha smucha lechaverta. Ubracha achrona shebekriya shema. And another example of that, even though it's not self-evident, is emes v'yatziv. Emes v'yatziv in the blessings of Kriya Shema is a bracha, but it doesn't open up with the words Baruch Atah Hashem. And in there, it's not adjacent to a bracha immediately preceding it, but explains the Rashbam that it really is considered to be immediately following or immediately adjacent to the bracha of Habocher Be'amo Yisrael Bi'ahava, which comes right before the Shema. Since it's sort of like the Shema is the central hub of all of these brachos, so therefore you look at Emes V'yatziv as a continuation of the Shema, which is adjacent to the bracha of Bocher Be'amo Yisrael Bi'ahava. And therefore it has the same format as of a bracha smucha lechaverta. And sheyesh mehen poseach bebaruch vein chosein bebaruch v'yesh men shechosein bebaruch vein poseach bebaruch. So in this aforementioned list, some of these brachos only open with baruch, and some of them only end with baruch. So for example, a short format bracha of, let's say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Asher Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher kedishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al netilas yadayim, since it's a one theme, one line bracha, it only opens with baruch and doesn't end with a last line of Baruch Atah Hashem, Hanot eles yadav, right? Or Hanot eles yadein, right? And similarly, that's an example of it only opens with baruch. An example of only ending with baruch is a bracha smucha lechaverta. And so the Brisa just basically tells you these are the kinds of exceptions that don't fit the general rule of always opening with baruch and ending with baruch. And here's another exception: v'hatov v'ametiv poseach bebaruch ve'eno chosein bebaruch. The bracha of Hatov V'Ametiv. Now this bracha is referring to the fourth bracha of Birkas Hamazon. The fourth bracha of Birkas Hamazon was instituted rabbinically, whereas the first three blessings of Birkas Hamazon are biblically adduced brachas. So in order to create a demarcation between the three biblical brachos of benching and the fourth rabbinic bracha of benching, Chazal instituted a rule that number one, you say Amen after Bonei V'Racham of Yerushalayim, to show that this is the end of the brachos deoraisa. And also they said that even though Hatov V'Ametiv, Hakel Avinu Malkeinu Adirenu Borenu, really qualifies as a bracha smucha lechavirta, and therefore should not open with Baruch, but since it is the beginning of a new set, you want to show that it's a new type of bracha, because it's not a bracha deoraisa, but only a bracha derabanan. It starts with Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam, Hakel Avinu Malkeinu Adirenu Borenu Go'aleinu, etc., etc., etc. At the end, bracha ends with Al Yechasreinu. Right. And it doesn't end with Baruch, and the question is why not? It seems to be a long format bracha, so even though it opens with Baruch, it should also end with Baruch. Yeah. So Tosfos asks this question, and Tosfos says, because normally when you have a long, elongated verbiage of bracha, the reason why you have to end with Baruch is because you've covered a lot of ideas. You've praised God, you've made a supplication, you've talked about a few different things, and therefore in order to delineate the conclusion of the bracha, you have to end it off with Baruch Atah Hashem. But this bracha of Hatov V'Ametiv is the reason it's so lengthy is because you're just reiterating different appellations of the Ribono Shel Olam. Like Tosfos says, She'ein ze arichos ela shemazker shem shamayim bahar be'lashonos. It's not that you're giving over many ideas, you're just stating God's description in many characteristics in many different ways, but they're all descriptions of Hashem. Hakel Avinu, Malkeinu, Adirenu, Boreinu, Goaleinu, Yotzreinu, Kedoshenu, Kedosh Yaakov, Ro'enu, Re Yisrael, Hamelech, Hatov, Hametiv, Lakol Shebachol Yom Vayom. Right? So therefore, really the theme is Hu Hetiv, Hu Metiv, Hu Yetiv Lanu, Hu Gamlanu Gamlenu, Gamaleinu La'ad. And therefore, that's really the only that's the only theme, and therefore it doesn't warrant a chasima because it's one idea. Okay, so the Gemara now says.
Some people don't say Amen. There's a Lubavitchers don't say Amen.
Yeah. Right. Lubavitch is right. This was an Einfal. This was the Chiddush of the Vilna Gaon. You're supposed to say Amen because it's the conclusion of a bracha. In any event, kasha le'ula. This presents a problem for Ula. Now, what is the problem that it presents for Ula? So the Rashbam says, well, listen, my opinion is that Ula, when he made Havdalah, he just said a one-line bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol. And therefore, that doesn't fit into the format, because if you're going to make a bracha, you have to start with Baruch and end with Baruch. That's why the Gemara says it's a problem for Ula. So the Gemara answers, Amar L'cha Ula Hanami Kebirkas Hamitzvos Damya. He says, Ula will tell you that this also is like a bracha you make on a mitzvah, like a Teshek Lulav, where it's a very short bracha, and the Gemara explains, Birkas HaMitzvahs my time, Mishum Dahoda'ahi, Hanami Hoda'ahi. What's the whole reason why a bracha on a mitzvah only warrants an opening baruch and not an ending baruch? Because it's just got one theme of saying thank you to Hashem. This also, of the bracha of Havdalah, also is a one-theme idea. There's no additional supplications involved. It's just one idea of thank you, Hashem, for dividing between holy and mundane, and therefore it warrants just an opening baruch and not an ending baruch.
Isn't Havdalah really part of Kiddush, the idea of Zechus and Shabbat Zakachim? Not Haidah?
I'm not sure. I don't know where that comes from.
No?
You'd have to. No, I don't know.
But it was kind of connected.
It could be, and I don't know, but you have to show me that. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Now, Tosfos has a problem with this whole Shakla Vitaria, according to the Rashbam's explanation. Tosfos says it seems so self-evident that if all Ula said was Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, he says Ein Lecha Ketzara Yoser Mizu. There's no bracha shorter than that. So why would I even think in the Havamina that should warrant a chasima, that should warrant a Baruch Atah Hashem at the end? Like, what was the Gemara thinking that it's a kasha on Ula? So Tosfos says, based on the force of that question, that it's not that Ula only said a one-liner like Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, but rather Ula did include multiple phrases in his Havdalah, but he didn't end off with Baruch Atah Hashem at the end. And that's when it says that Ula says Baruch HaMavdul ben Kodesh L'chol, it's just explaining to you what the last phrase that he ended with, but it wasn't with Baruch Atah Hashem HaMavdul ben Kodesh L'chol, but rather HaMavdul ben Kodesh L'chol was the last part of the bracha that he said, and he didn't end off with Baruch Atah Hashem. So the question is, why not? And therefore, the Gemara answers because it's like Birkas HaPeiros, because it's all one idea that you're thanking God for dividing, right? But at the end of the day, in the final analysis, we don't paskin like this Tosfos, the way Tosfos understands Ula. Because when we make Havdalah, we start off with the word Baruch, and we end off with Baruch, even though it's just one praise of Hashem of making divisions, but nevertheless, since it's multiple types of phrases of division, we start with Baruch and we end with Baruch. And this is where we'll hold it for today.